Welcome back to the Energy Intelligence Forum. I'm joined here now by Energy Intelligence President Alex Schindelar. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon, Alex.
Great to be here, Alex.
Just to start off, Alex, so this was our inaugural Energy Intelligence Forum, a big step in its own right for us, but made even more challenging by having to do it digitally this year because of the pandemic. How do you feel about how it's all turned out? And do you think that this format brings any advantages or benefits?
It's a good question. Thanks for that. Just so everyone knows, I mean, we were planning to rebrand this event at the end of last year. We announced this at the last Oil and Money, the 40th anniversary, which was last year. And so we had a major challenge ahead of us to try to reinvent this event, to think of it as something else, what the evolution of it was. And our kind of goal was to have it capture what the big energy issues were, but sort of refocus it through a 21st century lens. And that was the goal that we started at the end of last year. Now, of course, the coronavirus took us all by absolute surprise, and we had to sort of doubly reinvent the conference. We reinvented it once, and then we had to do it again to sort of move it online. So there was absolutely a lot of quick changes that we had to make. And it was a team effort to kind of get to shift gears a couple of different times. As far as the advantages, I think not meeting in person is a real shame for a lot of people. However, as I said in my opening remarks today, I think I've been able to watch so much more of the event this year than I've ever been able to watch before, and I've really been able to see it from start to finish and sort of get a bigger picture about what all the sessions are about. And if I've missed something, I can go back really quickly and watch. So I think it's that ability which is quite good. We can get a lot more diverse speakers and delegates from all over the world. And that's really important. You've seen that today. And I think it's just that flexibility of having, this sort of in your living room instead of having to travel to London. That it is one advantage. Of course, nothing replaces the kind of impact of a live event. And then finally, I think it's gone very well.
Good. Glad to hear it. And to move on to the content of the conference itself, we've had a huge range of speakers and panels so far, which have covered a wide range of topics. Did anything in particular stand out to you?
Well, I think the energy transition theme obviously ran through the whole event, which we expected ahead of time. We built the program that way, but everyone went to that topic very quickly. So I think that was very important. Again, as I said this morning on my opening remarks, I think that energy transition panel we had yesterday was kind of the embodiment of what we would like to see here, because you had a real debate between a number of the panelists about the speed and the shape of the energy transition. What's going to be part of it, what's not going to be part of it, and I think that's the kind of dialogue we're looking to sort of generate here. Hydrogen obviously was something that came up constantly and will continue to come up today. The next panel that's going to happen this afternoon will be on it'll be a renewable power producer who has a major hydrogen project. So I think those are the big themes. Obviously, the strategic transformation of the IOCs and NOCs and how that's going. I think we got a much better view of what that looks like. But generally very insightful. I think I learned a lot in the last 2.5 days, and we got a half a day left.
Okay, thank you. And just to follow up on what you said about the energy transition, obviously that was one of the main themes, as you mentioned, that we tried to highlight throughout the conference. How widely do you think this is reflected in the industry, and do you think that we are seeing a widespread pivot?
No, I think it's transformational. I think what we're seeing is the themes and topics we're talking about today, we would have never talked about even 2 years ago. We just started talking about them last year, and I think I remember some delegates came up to me afterwards and said, look, this energy transition thing, we're not sure how fast this is going to be. This maybe shouldn't be the whole kind of focus now, because there's a lot that are maybe not getting involved in that. This year, everybody's talking about it. So, I think outwardly, and I think this is an important distinction, outwardly, all companies know this is something they must talk about. And why is that? Why is it now? It's not just for PR. It's because the money isn't coming into the sector anymore unless you start playing by the rules. So the most important session I thought this week was that finance session on day one, where you heard a very stark reminder that no one is going to be investing in oil and gas equities or putting money into that sector unless there's a number of sort of barriers that are hit, and sort of outlining what those changes are on the finance side really made it clear that, like, yeah, shareholders matter, but also the money matters, and that money is not going to flow into the sector unless a number of things are sort of taken care of. And that money's not flowing into the sector right now. You hear that on panel after panel after panel. I think that's extremely significant. So the money talks, and that's what's sort of driving, I think, this conversation.
Okay. And we've also heard a lot of opinions so far about oil demand coming out of the pandemic. Do you think that it can return to pre-COVID days, or are we looking behind us to peak demand?
Well, so if we pull together the views we've heard over the last couple of days, I mean, the IEA sort of set the kind of, at least the story in place, saying, they see 2023, and if it's a bit slower, 2025. I think that's a very safe number to kind of put out there. In the trading panel, we saw a bit of a diversion of views on sort of individual product demand, how quickly that's going to come back. Some earlier this decade. Some, for example, diesel may never return to the pre-2019 levels, and others, jet fuel will take a really long time to get there. So there's sort of a two-speed or a multiple-speed kind of evolution of the pre-COVID thing, and whether things will get back to the peak. But it seems like there's basically two worldviews. One, that we've passed the peak and that's over, and for a lot of products, we're not going to get back there again. And the other one is that, well, the peak may be kind of towards the end of this decade. But I think very few people are saying now that the peak is nowhere in sight. I think now, whether people know what they're talking about, know what's going to happen in 10 years, who knows? But we've got a smaller window now than we had last year. So somewhere between, like, it's never going to happen, or it's going to be the next 5 to 8 years, something like that. But that's not a long period of time. If you're a company, you better start preparing for that now.
Okay, thank you, Alex. And just to round off, I know that this year's forum hasn't ended yet, so it's probably too early to start planning for the next one. But I'd like to ask you what big issues you think will go high on the agenda for the industry over the coming year.
Okay. Well, I think, a lot of the announcements this year from the oil companies on their strategy shifts are big and bold and surprising, right? And I think we've all latched onto that. I mean, what BP has said is pretty remarkable. Eni, we just heard from, had some pretty bold moves they announced this year very suddenly. You've got companies like Total and Shell. I mean, we're still waiting to hear from what Shell has to say. They're going to give us an update early next year. So there's still a lot of announcements, and the announcements are stunning as they are. But I think a lot of it's what we're going to see next year is sort of how are they actually putting this in place? Is there substance behind the announcement? I think that's a critical thing. The other thing that I think is important is this question around who's going to put money into the sector. And some of the questions that are raised are, well, who's going to buy these assets? And there are suggestions that national oil companies could be stepping in to buy these assets that nobody wants to put money into. Then there's private equity that could potentially do this. So I think this question around M&A, or who's going to buy the assets that are for sale, is actually quite an essential one. So those are just two things I can think of right now, but it's going to take 12 months for those two things to kind of play out. And clearly 12 months ago we had no idea we had COVID lurking around the corner, and here we are, sort of dominated by that. So never count out the sort of possibility of surprise in this current global economic geopolitical world.
Thank you so much, Alex. That's been really interesting. Thank you for your time, and good luck with the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thanks very much. See you.